This is a new webinar series for March. In February, we did a series called To Tilt or Not to Tilt. And the genesis of that series came about because I started seeing this rash of people either expressing interest or just buying tilt shift lenses, and I didn't understand why. So I asked a few of them, and they said, "Oh, we like the tilt effect. We like the way um, the tilt of a lens creates this, different plane of focus." And that's fine. Um, but then I was thinking about it more, and I wanted to do a series around just using FocalPoint to create a shallow depth of field for an image that doesn't have a shallow depth of field, that has a large aperture where your foreground and your background pretty much are all in focus. And the reason why I want to do this webinar is just to show you different examples of how you can take an image like that and kind of either boost it or change the look of the image by rendering the background or the foreground out of focus using FocalPoint. So let's go here. I've got 5 images as you can see, and we'll try to go through all of them. Let's take this first image, and we're just going to go into Photoshop. Now, this is an HDR image that I took in Philadelphia right around December, right around the Christmas time. And I positioned my camera. This was tone map. This is an HDR image, but it wasn't actually processed. So what I figured we can do is we can actually go into Photo Tools quickly, just to show you a quick shot of what I would do in Photo Tools, and then we'll go into FocalPoint. But the problem, it's not even a problem. I don't want to say it's a problem. But when I was shooting this, I wanted the tire really, this area here, to be in focus, and I wanted to render the background out of focus. If you don't really take the time to consider what your point of focus is or what your plane of focus is, you can provide your viewers with an image that has a lot to it. Here, there's a lot of stuff for your eyes to wander around, and if that's the case, if that's what you want, then just leave the image alone. But in this case, I really like the pattern of this tire in the foreground. And if we go, let's hide this Photoshop for a second. If we go to the info of the image, I want to see if it'll give me the aperture. So I shot this at f11, which is a pretty small aperture. And that's given the distance of my lens to the tire to my foreground, f11 was enough to kind of render the entire scene in focus. So let's first go into Photo Tools and let's just stylize it really quickly. And I haven't even worked on stylization. This is going to be totally on the fly, but I kind of want to see if we can do something here. So you can see we've got our onOne products listed here on our onOne pane in Photoshop. If you don't know how to get to this pane in Photoshop, this is CS5. Just go to Window, Extensions, and you can select onOne over here. You can also access the products by going to the File menu and then going to Automate, and you'll see the products listed under the Automate submenu. So I'm just going to double click on Photo Tools and we'll launch it just to stylize it. We're not even going to do that much. I just kind of want to see what we can get. So I'm going to go into the stylized categories over here and we'll find one. First we'll just do, maybe we'll warm it up a bit. We'll go to Golden Hour Enhancer, add the stack. So that warms everything. I'm going to mask out the foreground. And again, I'm not going to spend too much time going over what Photo Tools does because we have plenty of webinars with that go over it. I just want to see if we can boost the look first. So I'm just masking out these tires because I don't want them to be warm. I want them to be to retain their original tone. And I'm using a Wacom pressure sensitive tablet, the Intuos 4, which I strongly recommend. I love it. Both FocalPoint and Photo Tools, you can utilize the pressure sensitivity of a Wacom. You can see right here we've got these options. You can use the pressure sensitivity to control the brush size or the opacity, which is really nice. So we've warmed up the background, which is cool. And now what I'm going to do is just apply a quick effect called Just Enough Darkness, which was introduced in Photo Tools 2.6, which will kind of pop the shadows a bit. You can see how it just popped them. I'm going to drop it a little bit. All right. So now that I'm happy, and we can see here the original, and with just a few double clicks what we were able to do. So let's hit apply, and I'm going to let Photo Tools do its thing. Now, the nice thing is it's going to put the effects on its own layer in Photoshop. So if I want, I can control the opacity of that layer, or I can remove it altogether. And I like that kind of control and versatility. And once Photo Tools is done, we can go into FocalPoint. So in the order of my workflow, I typically like to stylize first and then work on depth of field if I am going to alter it. So here, we've got the effects on its own layer, and now we're going to go into FocalPoint. When we go into FocalPoint, I'm going to go into the Edit menu over here, and I'm going to reset everything. So if you go to Edit and go to Reset All, it resets the entire product. All of the settings are reset. And so you can see here we've got this focus bug. This is the main point, or the heart of FocalPoint, is this focus bug. And you can see its body is round, and it's got these legs that you can tug on. And you can change the size, the shape, and the orientation just by tugging on these legs. And so, like I said, we want the tire in focus. But this doesn't look very good, mostly because the bug, this round shape, is not really appropriate for what I want to do. I would rather have more of a rectangular plane of focus. So to do that, I can change the shape of the bug from round to planar. And what happens is the bug now turns more square than round. And I can just adjust the plane and just position it where I want. So I'm just going to position really, right over here in the foreground. Now, it still is way too out of focus for me. It just doesn't look very natural. So I'm going to drop the amount of blur using this amount slider. And we're going to start getting more detail back into the area that's out of focus. And that's the nice thing about FocalPoint and this amount slider, is that you can control the amount of that blur. You can also control the feathering. So there's this feathering slider that will control the transition from in focus to out of focus. So if I show you the mask over here, this is the mask. Everything that's black is in focus. Everything in white is totally out of focus based on your amount. And whatever is in gray is your transition. So watch what happens. If I put my feather to 0, you see how it goes to this straight line? And if we hide the mask, you'll see that there is this there is no transition. It's a hard stop. I never really see a need, unless you've got a perfectly straight horizon and you have a very low blur amount in the background. I never see a reason to have a feathering this non-existent. Now, if we go back to the mask unit, we bring the feathering to 100%. You can see that we have almost no area that's totally in focus. It's just almost all transition. So if we hide the mask, you can see that there is really no transition. We just have this tiny sliver that's kind of in focus. So what I like to do is I usually bring the feathering up to 100, and I start going down to see what I get, what the results are. So I'm just looking for a nice smooth transition from this part here. This is my foreground through the background. Now, again, what I can do is I can restore focus to the tire by going to this brush right here. Next to the bug icon is a brush, and this is a focus brush. So you've got this pane right here called focus brush, and we're going to have the mode set to paint focus. And now what I'm free to do is just kind of, with a big broad stroke, just start drawing around. And what that does is it snaps whatever I draw into focus. Now you want to be careful though, because if you go too far out like that, you see how you painted this particle board over here in focus, and it doesn't look good. So let's just undo that. Now, you might find that it could be frustrating to work like that with such kind of detailed strokes. My recommendation there is to drop the opacity of my brush right now is 100%. If I drop the opacity to say 54%, it's a little bit more forgiving. It's not going to bring the area that I paint in focus as quickly. So what it will require you to do is paint several times, which is fine because you have several chances to refine your selection. The opposite is also true. If you brush too much, or if you have too much of an area that's in focus and you want to blur it out some more, you can change this mode from paint focus to paint blur. So it's basically, and there's a question that I see here from Michelle. Hey, Michelle, good to see you. Is there a way to get the focus brush blur to match the focus bug blur? Yeah, I mean, it's just a matter of adjusting your opacity um, to the amount. And then as you start painting, you should have a match to whatever's out of focus. The difference is that you want to make sure that it's consistent with wherever you're painting. So this is what I'm doing here is I'm just kind of making these brush strokes. Now, oops, you see I painted it in blur instead of focus. So we're going to undo that because I don't want this to be blurred. I'm going to change my mode back to paint focus. And I'm just going to kind of massage the area here and get the areas that I need in focus. And you'll want to be kind of paying attention to this. What you can also do is show your mask to see what you're doing. So you can see what you're painting in. And it helps to visualize. So if we hide our mask here, you can see that there are certain areas over here that are kind of out of focus. Just by, if we go to the mask, you can see I kind of want all of this to be in focus. So I can go in mask view now with my brush at 100%, say, and just start drawing in these areas. Because I know that this is the edge of my tire, and I want it to be perfectly in focus. So now, if we hide the mask, the entire tire now is pretty much in focus. And we're starting to see a good separation now of the foreground and the background. You can also bring your viewer's eye to the foreground in addition to kind of rendering this out of focus. And again, we can go back now and bring the amount up to render it even more out of focus. It's kind of up to you. I can't tell you that there's one right way or wrong way. But you can see, let's say over here, I don't know if you're noticing this, but this part of the image is still in focus because it's in the plane of focus with the tire. If you want this to go out of focus, we can select the brush, paint blur, and let's drop the amount really low. Let's make our brush size pretty big and just do broad strokes like this and see what it does. So that's pretty good actually, it kind of matches. But we have that little bit of transition, so you'll want to kind of drop your brush size really, really narrow because it's going to compound. So if you keep drawing on here, it'll compound the blur. So you just want to make sure that you get a good representative brush size. And that's pretty good right there. We now have kind of a match. And you can go to town with this, but you're starting to see a really nice separation. I can also kind of start massaging the edge of this tire here because it's still a little bit blurry. And there's a question by Andrew as to whether you can use this as a smart object. Yeah, with FocalPoint, you can use smart objects. So if we deselect the preview here, we can see what we've done so far. So you'll notice how once, it's always funny with FocalPoint when you deselect or remove the work that you've done to see the original image, it's almost like, oh yeah, while you're drawing in FocalPoint, sometimes it gets lost on me just how much of a difference it makes, even with a very subtle amount of blur. But when we turn it on, you can notice how the tire really starts to pop. Mark asks a good question. So Mark asks a question where if I have let's say over here, let's show the bug again. So here's my bug right here. I just want to make sure, there it is. If that is set, so the bug is set, the opacity of the bug is set to 25%. And Mark is asking, if I take my pen brush, my focus brush, and I set the opacity to 100%, will that override the bug? Yes, it will, Mark. So you want to be careful with that. So if you have, if this here is out of focus by 25%, and I take my opacity and I paint the blur to 100%, it should be even more out of focus. So it's really a matter of making sure, again, that you're matching your opacity. Now, same thing if I paint focus at 100%, it overrides whatever the mask is. How did I just show the bug? On the bottom here are 4 icons. This is your zoom tool, this is your move tool, this is your bug, and this is your masking brush. So I just selected the bug and I hovered over the image, and then the bug appears. Is the amount of blur going to vary behind the tires? No. Well, kind of. It'll vary based on your feathering. So if we undo this, the amount of blur will kind of become, it'll go from in focus to out of focus based on your feathering, which is here at the top. So if I decrease the feathering, there's less of the transition's more abrupt. But if I increase it, the transition becomes very, very gradual, and it almost bleeds into the tire. But it will not override the mask because, in this case, if we show the mask, we've already painted 100. Anything that's pure black is 100% in focus. So the mask in this case will not override it because we've removed that from the mask, or we've masked it out in effect. So this will always be in focus. And this actually is a great segue, I think, to my next image. Let me see if, let's cancel it. So that's just, this right here was your basic use of focal point to create a shallow depth of field. This here can simulate something like, if you want, this can almost be an f2 or an f1.4. Now, realistically, at an f1.4, at this distance, your plane of focus would be much, much more narrow. You wouldn't be able to get this entire tire in focus. But that's the great thing about focal point, is it really allows you to craft your depth of field and your plane of focus. That's the whole point of focal point. If we wanted, we could have we have these lenses over here where we've actually taken these lenses. These are some of Canon's and Nikon's most expensive lenses, and we've reproduced the areas that are out of focus. So here, let's say we shot this at a 35 and we wanted to reproduce it at a 1.4 aperture. It actually simulates what that out of focus area looks like. So that's kind of how you would use the lens database. And I actually got hold of a bunch more lenses, like Nikon's 600mm prime, courtesy of Lens Pro to Go, and I'm working on creating profiles for those lenses. So we're going to increase this database by about 8 more lenses, which I'm really excited about. So let's cancel out a focal point and let's go to the next image. I just want to see. My point that I was just making is a good segue. Which image is this? All right, so here's another. So that was a situation. This actually doesn't segue, but I'll do it with the image after it. This is a situation where I'm taking a shot with an already shallow depth of field, and I want to make it even more shallow because I want to focus truly on this Budweiser can. So the first thing we're going to want to do is go into Focal Point, or into Photo Tools. Let's just go to File, Automate, Photo Tools. And while this is going on, I see Gary's asking if I'm still willing to share my Wacom settings. Absolutely. I think that came up in the Q&A session last week. With the Wacom Intuos Force, I can actually share how my buttons are configured. So I was away this past week, and now that I'm back, I need to catch up on all my tasks, and that's one of the things that I will do, is just share them if people are interested. So here, again, let's just go quickly and process. I want to boost the yellows of this image, so I'm going to go to the pastel colors, and I know it's going to do a nice job of boosting the yellows, but that's way too much. So let's drop it down to 0 and just boost it up a little bit. Now I'm going to mask out the can because I don't want the can to be affected by it. I saw that it was getting a little bit brighter. And now what I can do is also probably add that just enough darkness as well. I like what it does to these kinds of images, especially with shadows. And let's drop it down to 0 and just see where it's good. Right around here is good. All right, let's hit apply. Now, before with the first image, we used a planar bug. Here, we're going to use a circular bug, and I'll show you how we can take an image. So this image was taken with I shoot with the Canon 5D Mark II, and I bought a third-party lens, an Olympus Zuiko 85mm f2 lens. And here's the great thing about this lens: it's tiny, it's solid as a rock, and it costs about $250. It's an old lens, and you basically buy an adapter. It's an adapter that on one end has the Canon EF mount, and on the other end it has the Olympus mount. And so what it allows me to do is have an 85mm lens that opens up at f2 that has a very unique out of focus quality. So this was shot at 85 at 2.0, and I focused on this crushed beer can. This was in Seattle. So let's go into FocalPoint now, and let's just kind of, the leaves they're great, but they're still a bit too distracting. I really want your focus to be on that beer can. So again, I'm going to go to Reset All under the Edit menu to start over, and we have our circular bug. So let's position it on the area that we want in focus, and let's just tweak the shape so that it just fits the beer can. Now, the first thing that I want to do is boost my feathering to 100%. So I want a very, very subtle transition, which we can see right here. So there is our mask. Now, what I'm free to do is, first I'm going to take my the amount slider and drag it down because that's way too out of focus. And yeah, Raymond, I will be working on an image with people. Absolutely. So let's just drop it down here. And so you can see now that we're getting a nice kind of out of focus area, but you still can get an idea of what is there. With my focus brush, I can now just paint the beer can and start snapping it in. And I'm just going to outline it. I'm just going to go around. When I get really close to the edge, I'm going to start dropping the opacity low because I don't want the pavement really to be in focus. Let me boost it up a little bit. It's a bit too low. But what we start getting is almost like a three-dimensional feeling, like the can is almost floating off of the ground, which in a way is a cool effect in and of itself. And so you just basically paint around here, and if we want, we can actually bring it up a bit more, just to make sure that the edges of the can are in focus. You don't want blurry edges. You kind of want to make sure that you take care of that. So here, we're starting to see that three-dimensional look. Now, if we want, we can also bring focus to the can by dropping the brightness and boosting the contrast of the background. And we can do that under the Options panel. We've got these two sliders here, brightness and contrast. So watch what happens as I drop the brightness and boost the contrast. The can almost starts to glow. Now, if this is too much for you, you can always either increase the highlight bloom, which will boost specular highlights, or you can bring the brightness back up. Totally up to you. But here's the original. All I'm doing is deselecting this preview checkbox, and then we're going to turn it back on. And it does a really nice job of we're rendering the background, which is already kind of out of focus, even more out of focus. And now your eye goes straight to the lip of this can, which is exactly what I wanted. We can also, if you want, add a vignette. Now, there are two ways you can add a vignette here. So a vignette is basically burning the edges of your image. By default, if you drop the brightness, what happens is, and I'm bringing it really extreme, you see this option that says vignette follows focus bug. So the focus bug is right over here around the can. The vignette, by default, will follow the bug, and you can control how close it is to the center of the bug with the midpoint slider. If you don't want that, if you want the vignette to occur evenly across the edges, just deselect this option. And so you can see how it kind of now evenly, now this looks awful because we've used way too much of it. So let's kind of reset this. And I kind of, in this case here, I do like it following the bug. Just a bit, not that much. But if you want just to illustrate, if we deselect it, now it just kind of has an even burn to the edges. And again, let's just toggle the before and the after. So that's creating now a selective depth of field, one that it was created after you've already shot the image. If you don't have an image, or if you don't have a lens rather, where you can open up your aperture really wide, like a 2.8 or a 1.4 or a 1.2, which is Canon's fastest lenses on the market, and I think Nikon as well. I don't know if Nikon has a, yeah, I think they do have a 1.2 85 millimeter, I think. But that's basically a really nice way of simulating. So let me cancel out here, and we'll go into the next image. And what I'm going to do is, because Raymond asked, I'm going to skip, we'll go to image 3 next, but let's go to image 4 first. Let me close this image because Raymond asked if we're going to work with people. And since we've done two kind of landscapey type of shots, let's do one with people. Now, I've demoed this image before. This is an image taken by Andy Marcus of Fred Marcus Studios. They're a wedding photography team out in New York City. And the reason why I wanted to demo this is it's a really good example of taking an image where, so this was taken with a wider angle lens. You can tell this is probably around a 35 millimeter lens. And the wider your lens, the faster you'll build your depth of field. So if this was taken with a longer lens, you'd have more play with separating your foreground. In this case, your foreground is your couple as well as the dance floor. So you can, with a longer lens, you can separate them from the background. But because this was taken with a wider lens, you've built up your depth of field much more quickly. And if the couple was not here, if this was a shot where you're the photographer and you were hired by this hall to, hey, we want you to take a really cool shot of our dance floor, you would have succeeded wonderfully. I may have cloned out this exit sign back here because no one needs to see an exit sign, but it's a great shot of the dance hall. If you're the wedding photographer for this couple, well, the couple, they look great, they're positioned really well, but they're drowned out by the entire image. So how can we use FocalPoint to protect our couple? We know that we want the couple to be in focus, and we want our plane of focus to be right around where they're standing on this dance floor. So what can we do? Well, the nice thing about FocalPoint is it will use selections in Photoshop. So what do I mean by that? Whatever you have, if you make a selection before you go into FocalPoint, FocalPoint will only work with whatever is selected. So you could use, say, a quick select brush in Photoshop and start selecting your couple. To save time, though, because I want to make sure that the couple has a pretty good selection, what I'm going to do is deselect, and I'm going to go to my Channels tab and load a selection that I have made already. So I didn't, there's nothing much here. All I did was, for those of you that may not be familiar, when you make a selection in Photoshop for an image, you can save that selection as a channel. All you do is select this little icon right there to create a new channel. And then you can load it up by, the way I loaded it, just kind of to show you, let's deselect again. I held the Command key on a Mac or the Control key on a PC, and you see when I press it, the little icon, you see that little square appear. That'll load your selection. Now notice, the selection is not of the couple. I want the couple to be protected. I want FocalPoint just to work on the dance floor. So that's why you have everything but the couple selected. That's why you've got the broken marching ants going around the frame and not just around the couple. So when I go into FocalPoint, FocalPoint will only work on the dance floor. So what does that mean? Well, let's go into FocalPoint. File, and this can work. After this, we'll do this on a scenic image. We'll do it on two types, so you can see the difference. So again, let's go and reset the settings to 0. Now you can see wherever I put my focus bug, that stays in focus. But notice how the couple also stays in focus. The couple is not being touched. The couple is being ignored by FocalPoint. So this is a way that you can really, if there's a particular, let's say the tire, for instance, if I wanted only the tire in focus, I didn't want to deal with painting or anything, I could have made a selection around that tire and worked with FocalPoint. but I wanted to show you that was the way that tire was your most, I guess, basic use of focal point. Get a bug, position it, and then refine it with a focus brush. Here, we have a little bit more to do. So let's, right off the bat, the circle will not do it for me. I don't need a circular shape. What I want is a planar shape. So let's change it from round to planar. And let's adjust the orientation and the positioning and put it by their feet. So now you can see, okay, now we're getting somewhere. Now we're getting a dance floor. We want our dance floor in focus. We want the background to be out of focus. Now I can also, again, simulate that out of focus area by selecting one of these lens profiles. So if I want to select the 35 again, it'll change the characteristics. Now, what I can also do is, there are a few things I can do. First, I can adjust the feathering. So if I want a little bit more of the dance floor in focus, I can drop the feathering down, and you can see how we're getting a little bit more of the dance floor in focus, which is good. Let's play around with it even more. Well, there we go. Okay, that's good. Now, you can see that when we've rendered, let's just deselect the mask. You can see all of these spots over here, these bright lights. When we render them out of focus, they become specular highlights. And what I want to do is capitalize or exploit them. And the way I can do that was, I kind of touched on the highlight bloom slider earlier. We've got this slider here where if I boost it up, you can see how it kind of makes them pop. And it looks really, really dramatic, like there's 1,000 paparazzi standing behind them shooting their flashes. What I can also do is, like I did before, I can drop the brightness and boost the contrast to really kind of wrangle that back in, set the mood. And Jacqueline's asking, can we use Mask Pro to create a mask or a selection to get a more detailed mask? Yeah, you could. You can use the Mask Pro mask function, the selection function, to get a selection. But in this case here, it was just easier to use the quick select brush. And then what I can finish, the way I can finish this image off is, again, by adding a vignette. So we can drop it down. And I think in this case here, it works well to follow the bug. But if we didn't want the bug to follow, we can deselect it. But like I said, I kind of like this look over here. So that's basically it. Let's deselect and see where we. I mean, the difference is dramatic, and it's a much more presentable image. So that's how you would use FocalPoint with people. If we didn't make a selection, let's cancel out. So in this situation here, if we didn't make a selection, we go back into FocalPoint, it would be a little bit more difficult. Not impossible, but now you can see how the selection is not being adhered. So we'd have to go to our brush and just start painting focus. And it can get a bit, complicated and very, it can be time consuming if you have complex edges. That's where Photoshop's quick selection really comes in. Here, what I usually will do in this case is I'll draw an outline of what I want in focus, and then I'll go back to blur with a low opacity and just draw around it until I get that in focus. And that's basically what you can do. But you'll still get the same effect everywhere else. Okay. Let's go back to image 3, which is the same basic principle. I just wanted to show it to you in 2 different ways. So in this case here, I took this image a couple of weeks ago. It was on some train track, and I knew I wanted this in focus, but I didn't want everything else in focus. So I think I saved the channel. I did. So I'm going to load the channel. And you can see, again, we've got everything but this sign selected. And if I go into FocalPoint, the same exact thing will happen. Now, the thing with FocalPoint, you may notice, is it's sticky. So what does that mean? That means that if you worked on an image in FocalPoint and hit apply, and then you come back with a different image, your settings will be retained. So the bug is positioned in the same place, your brightness and contrast are at the same levels. That's why I like to go to reset all pretty much every time I start working in FocalPoint. It's not even just for demo purposes. It's more just so that I have a fresh perspective. So again, notice how the sign's not being touched. The only thing that's being affected is everything but the sign. So let's change from round to planar, change the orientation, and I want my foreground in focus. That sign, the train car in the background it's cool, but it's too distracting. Now, I kind of want, this hill in focus. I want everything else out of focus. So what it does is it helps create kind of depth if I have the hill in focus, but this background out of focus. So and this is something that you really should, become careful to look at is, so you're rendering certain things in focus and other things out of focus. Well, how can you do that effectively? So because this little snow hill is in focus, you kind of can see a lip, and it looks like there's some sort of depth. It's not just this sign sticking here. Now, what I'll do is I'll show my mask just to make sure that I've got the whole hill in focus, which I do now. And it's nice. You can see the selection is really, really crisp. Yeah, Mike, I can go over the quick select steps afterwards, just so that you can see exactly what we did. No worries there. So let's hide the mask, and now let's start refining the area that's out of focus. We can, if you want, we can boost the amount out to really make it shallow. And in this case, it works. It really works. And then we can drop the brightness of that area, just so it doesn't look too bright. And what I can do now is, once I have this done, I can go into Photo Tools. I didn't stylize this, but I can go to Photo Tools and bring this, work on this. So I actually skipped that step. Let's see what a vignette looks like. I can take it or leave it. I'm not really excited. Actually, I don't like it because I don't like what it's doing to the snow over here. So let's reset that. Yeah. And unfortunately, you can't mask out a vignette in here. So if you want to, in this situation, if I wanted a vignette, I would do it outside of FocalPoint. But here's our original image. So you can see how the sign kind of gets lost. And I took care. This was taken, I think this was a 70-200. And I don't remember what the aperture was. I can find out what the aperture was pretty easily, but I want to say it was probably a 2.8. But now I kind of really can render it out of focus with FocalPoint. So let's cancel out of here. All right, let's see what the fifth image is, if it's a good one. I can't recall. So this is another one. Let's do this one. This image here, I didn't want to open it in preview. I put it into the mix about 10 minutes before the webinar started. I was looking at some images. I'm like, oh, this could be a cool one. So this is going to be totally on the fly. I did not work on this, but I know what I want to do. And actually here, so Mike, this might be a good, for this image here, this could be a good recap of what I did to make a selection. So I've got a quick select brush selected. It's when I have my toolbar in Photoshop oriented vertically, it's the fourth icon. And if I press and hold, you'll see that you have two options. If you see this magic wand tool, just press and hold and change it to quick select. Now what I can do is make a selection around this sign. And does a really nice job of snapping it. And so I want to make sure I have the whole sign selected, which I do now. Now I get to refine. So now I'm just kind of removing what I don't want. So in this case, I don't want the insides. I don't want that circle. I don't want that circle. Okay. And then let's refine right there. And this is kind of what you have to do. You want to make sure that you get what you want. Let's just remove that little bit right there. Okay, so all I'm doing is making my selection around the sign. Now, remember, if I went into FocalPoint with my sign selected, FocalPoint would only render the sign out of focus. Everything else would be in focus. So what you want to do is go to Select and then Inverse. So that'll select everything but the sky. So now think about it. Because I inverted my selection, and my original selection was just this sign or this barrier, say. Because I inverted it to select everything but it, that's what FocalPoint will work on. So what do I do now? How do I save that selection? If I go to the Channels tab, so if you don't know where Channels is, just go to Window and then go to Channels in Photoshop. If I click on this icon right here, it creates this alpha channel. So watch, if I deselect by hitting Command or Control D, or if you can go to Select and select Deselect, nothing is selected. If I go from my Layers palette to my Channels palette, and I press and hold the Command or Control key on the thumbnail, it snaps that selection. So when I'm doing these demos, to save time so you don't have to see me going through and making a selection, I'll always save a quick a selection channel because it saves time. Now let's see what happens. Let's go into FocalPoint and see what we can do here. So in theory, because I made my selection, the sign should stay tack sharp. So let's reset everything. And sure enough, the sign is tack sharp. So let's change our plane of focus from round to planar, or our shape rather. And just like the wedding couple, I want the foreground in focus. So let's put the bug right down here. And now we're getting a really nice three-dimensional feel. This is actually looking pretty cool. Let's drop let's make it really, really low. That's a bit too much. And let's try the mount because it's a bit too far out of focus. But you do have kind of a nice three-dimensional feel because you can see through the hole here. And if you want, if that's too far out of focus, what I would do is I would select my brush and paint in focus at a low opacity just in this circle here. See how it kind of snaps in? Let's see again. Let's do it again there. And another brush over here. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. And again, if it's too much, just drop the amount. I've gone in where I've had the amount at like 2 or 3, like really, really low. Here, let's bring it down to 0, so the image is restored, and then let's just bring it to 3. It does a nice job still of rendering it out of focus. And as you go up, just boost it up slowly in small increments. And even at 10, it's better because the sign really, really pops. And then I'll always drop my brightness. Not always, but most of the times I will, because it really, really brings the foreground out. But it's realistic. It's not like you just made that selection in Photoshop and then applied a blur because everything else would be out of focus. Because we have a focus bug, a planar focus bug, we've retained focus in our foreground. So that's a really nice thing about it. And again, let's just toggle the preview. Here's our original. And here's our after image. So the sign truly, truly pops. And that's what I'm talking about, having a selective depth of field. I'm actually glad that this image worked out. Yeah, Hassler. This was a good image to work on. I found it literally just a few minutes before the... Let's see if we boost the optical quality. The optical quality will bring a little bit more detail in the area that's out of focus. So if you drop your optical quality, the image will suffer. So if we bring it down, you'll see how the optical quality kind of simulates the quality of the lens. So cheaper lenses have kind of poor optical quality in the areas that are rendered out of focus. So the higher you bring the optical quality, the sharper the area is that's out of focus. So here you can kind of bring the out of focus area up even more. And so this is something that works well in commercial environments for commercial photography. If you have a product, let's just pretend this was a product, and you didn't have the ability, or for whatever reason, this was the shot that you started with. Well, the product doesn't really stand out here. The product really stands out over here, and you can totally adjust if the client comes back and says, this is too artificial looking. Okay, well, just come back and wrangle it down using a smart object. So what was the location of the shot? This was in Manhattan. I was visiting my family. I'm from New York City, born and raised in Brooklyn. This was taken over last summer, and I was just walking around. I'll do that very often. I'll just walk around the city going from block to block, no agenda. I saw this sign or this barrier, and I just like the way someone tagged it to say love in a way. It's kind of Lovo, but I kind of perched my tripod and I got my brackets, and it's an HDR image. This is an HDR image, so that was it. Um, all right, let's start doing Q&A. I'm looking through the questions now. What effect will opacity of the bug have? The opacity is basically the amount. So there is no opacity slider for the bug. It's the amount slider. So at 0%, the opacity is gone. So the bug is non-existent. At 100%, the bug is at its full strength, and it actually will take a bit to load because it's applying a very heavy blur. Um, Alan's asking, is there a difference between using the channels to save selection compared to Photoshop select save selection? No, not really. I just like using channels. I don't know why. No good reason. That's kind of how I was brought up. I don't know when save selection was implemented in Photoshop. I know it's there, but I just kind of like this. Can the focus bug be controlled by a chosen gradient? I'm not sure I understand your question, James. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, Laird. You're talking about this opacity here. Yeah, this will apply the opacity of the actual bug itself. I apologize. I thought you were talking about the opacity of the actual blur. Yeah, so let's bring the opacity down here, back to a realistic level. Adjusting the opacity here will adjust the opacity of the bug itself. So if you want this area to be just as out of focus as the background, you'll drop the opacity of that bug to 0, and effectively the bug goes away. So let's drop it here. Let's boost the opacity. See how it's coming back into black. It's the same as any other opacity slider. Okay. Do you alter the curvature and rotation much, or do you normally leave them as at 0? No, yeah, I leave these. So, okay, I see what you're saying. This would be better. The curvature and rotation let's go back to the wedding image to explain that, because that mostly affects specular highlights. Let's close this and take the wedding image back. All right, so let's quickly, again, load that selection and go into FocalPoint. And let's reset everything. Change it from round to planar. That the curvature and rotation does not affect the bug. I'll show you what it affects. All right, let's boost the highlight bloom here so you can see. So you see these specular highlights, and you see how right now these diamonds, they match this shape right here. The curvature and the rotation, you can control, first of all, the number of sides. So your aperture is basically made of the shape of your blades. So some lenses I don't want to say necessarily less expensive lenses have less blades, but one of the nice things about your like L series glass or nice quality lenses is that they will have more blades to the aperture. What that does is, in cases like specular highlights, it'll give you a nice smooth edge. It'll smooth out the bokeh area. So watch what happens if I go to 3 sides. The specular highlights turn triangular because your aperture is made of 3 blades. You can control the shape and the size, so the curvature will make the kind of bring the edges inward. The rotation will literally rotate, and if you bring it outward, it'll make it bulbous. So if you want a nice smooth specular highlight, I would bring this to say like 8 sides, and I'll get it so that the curvature is round. You get kind of nice smooth round edges. Or if you want, you can make them more star-like. So you can see there should be 8 different sides. And then you can change the rotation. So that's what curvature and rotation are for. rotation will literally, so it's easier to go back to three to do rotation. So here's your preview. You see how it's previewing the rotation? So if I make this point straight up, everything in the image will follow. Actually, it's inverted right now. So let's go here. And it basically will follow. And if you bring it bulbous, it'll match the shape. That's basically what it does. And Jeff, thanks for confirming. So Jeff is saying that if you don't want to save a channel palette, the save selection will do the same thing. And you're 100% right, Jeff. Photoshop is one of those clinical proofs to the phrase that there is always more than one way to skin a cat. You can do the same thing 20 different ways in Photoshop. It's just a matter of finding. Usually what I find is people adopt the methodology to accomplish a task based on who teaches it to them. So I was always taught to save a channel. That's just kind of how I go about it. So that's that. Let's see here. Can you save a work in progress? You can if you want to use, say, a smart object. And I'm working on a smart object webinar. I don't want to go into it right now because I'm trying to make it more robust. So we will be doing a smart objects webinar very, very soon. Will this get posted later? Absolutely. Can you defocus both the foreground and the background? Yeah, you can do that several ways. We can go back to the original question about opacity. So if I want the foreground out of focus and I want the couple in focus, I can just drop my opacity of the bug to 0%. But it looks awful because it looks like they're floating on something. But now the foreground's out of focus. And you could, again, make a partial opacity, but I'd much rather keep the bug at 100% opacity and drop the amount. The Olympus lens. So Jack asked what kind of Olympus lens. I could tell you right now. I have my gear stuff listed on my blog. I don't remember if it was an OM1 or OM2, and I think I have it listed there. Let's go to gear. So it just says OM Zuko 85 2.0, but I do love this lens, and I link to reviews to all the lenses I own, just kind of like what they are. But yeah, I paid like about $250. I love that lens. It's such a tiny lens. So, let me see. Do you prefer not to use the arms on the bug? That's a great question. So, there are two types of controls from a bug. You can see that the two legs that have filled in circles, that controls the size and the shape. So dragging it up and down makes it wider or narrower, and just turning it around controls the orientation. The other two controls the blur amount and the feathering, the ones with the hollow circle. So if I look at the sliders, you see how I'm adjusting, and I'm adjusting the antennas and they're adjusting the sliders. The same thing here. This will control the vignette and the midpoint. So if I go down to the vignette, it adjusts that. I do not like using the antennas at all. I am not a fan of it. I love using sliders because it gives me precise control. Can you use more than one bug at a time on an image? Absolutely. Really quickly, let's jump into Lightroom, and I'm going to go to my FocalPoint catalog here. Let's take this image right here and send it into Photoshop. So this was an image taken by Scott Stolberg. He's an awesome California-based photographer. And if we go into FocalPoint, we'll use two different focus. And I don't want to throw too much at you, especially because, well, you guys can handle it. Let's start everything over. So right now, the first thing I want to do is render to the foreground in focus. Change my shape to planar, change the orientation, put it down. All right. Now we can adjust the amount. We can boost the specular highlights. But you can see how it doesn't really match up. This area here is still within my plane of focus. So to do that, to kind of get that effect, what I can do is I can click on this plus sign right here under this focus bug, and it adds a second bug. So you can see the first bug is over here, a little circle right there. But I've got the second bug, and what I can do is I'm going to change that shape to planar. I'm going to position it kind of over here. And the first thing I want to do is change the directionality of the blur. So to do that, what I'm going to do is when I have my cursor in the body of the bug, and I press the Option key on a Mac or the Alt key on a PC, it's going to tilt the blur. So this is what you would use to get that tilt shift look. And all it's doing is changing the directionality of the blur. So I'm going to increase the size, and I'm going to drop the amount. Actually, I'm going to increase the amount and drop the feathering, make it more of a transition. Because I want this area to be somewhat in focus. Because what we're doing is we're going from in focus through to out of focus. Now what I can do is I want to paint that lamppost in. So I'm just going to select my brush, paint my focus on the lamppost. Make sure I get the lamppost in focus. And now we're getting a good separation from our foreground and our background. And that's how I would use multiple bugs at once. Instead of just having my one bug plane of focus over here, I can use a second bug to control the depth of field through the frame. Jack, I will email you with details about that. So I hope that answers the question about using multiple bugs. You can keep adding. I think, let me see how many bugs. I want to say it's either 6 or 8. So we have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6 bugs. Yeah. So you can have a maximum of 6 bugs at once. And if you want to remove them, just hit the minus button. 1, 2, 3, 4. There you go. That's how you would use multiple bugs. Hassler, if you want to see more about tilt shift effect with FocalPoint, like I said, go to our archive. If you go to the podcast channel, which I'll show you in a minute, or if you go to our university page, we have a whole series basically where I recreate. I have 3 tilt shift lenses. I have the Canon 17mm, the 45, and the 24 Mark II. I went out and I shot various shots with the tilt effect engaged, and then I shot the same exact shot head on. And I used FocalPoint to recreate the shots so that basically to simulate how FocalPoint can actually simulate these multiple $1,000 lenses with the same miniature world look, which is what I think a lot of people like about tilt shift. So with that, what I'd like to do is just cancel out and finish up my presentation. After the presentation, if people want to stick around, we can do some Q&A as well.